A guest ordering twice may seem harmless, but in Nero Wolfe's world, nothing is simple. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Umbra. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. I love reading them. Let's begin. I've seen plenty of oddities shuffle their way through the front door of our West 35th Street brownstone. Clients with hearts heavier than their wallets, suspects with faces that beg to be slapped, and delivery men who couldn't take "ring the bell" once as gospel. But this one, I'll admit, made me pause mid-step on the way back from the front hall phone. The man was already sitting in the red leather chair, hat still in his lap, posture politely stiff, like he was waiting to be arraigned. That alone was enough to raise a brow, because nobody sits before Fritz or I tell them to, unless, of course, Wolfe has waved a hand, which he hadn't. He hadn't even looked up from his book. "Goodwin," Wolfe said in that voice of his, like warm butter sliding over a cold stone. "Explain this incursion." The guest, to his credit, cleared his throat. "I was told Mr. Wolfe entertains clients at 1 o'clock sharp. I arrived at 1. The door was open." "Fritz doesn't leave doors open," I said. I leaned against the office doorway, arms crossed. "Try again." He flushed, not the type of red you see on guilty men, but the shade worn by overeager ones. I asked the man in the kitchen. He told me to come in." That was Fritz's cue, and right on time he appeared, hands dusted with flour, apron neat as ever. "Archie, I let him in. He was most insistent, and he ordered twice." That stopped me. "Twice?" "Yes," Fritz said, frowning faintly. "He requested one of my lemon tarts, which I offered gladly. Then, not 5 minutes later, he ordered again, the same tart, the same words, as though the first had not existed." I glanced at Wolfe. He hadn't so much as twitched, but I could tell his ears were open, and that grey matter of his was already spinning its wheels. Me, I was still catching up. The stranger set his hat aside and straightened his tie. "Mr. Wolfe, I've come because I'm being followed, watched, perhaps plotted against. I need your help." Wolfe shut the book with a snap, loud enough to make Fritz flinch. He fixed the man with a gaze that could peel wallpaper. "You repeated yourself with the tart," Wolfe said. "Why?" The fellow blinked. "Because I was nervous, sir. I forgot I had already asked." Wolfe grunted, low and skeptical. "Poppycock. A man forgets his umbrella. He does not forget dessert." That was the moment I knew. We had ourselves a live one. Fritz retreated to the kitchen with the kind of dignity that says a man can be insulted and still see to his tart cases. The guest watched him go as if the answer to his trouble had been baked in the crust. Wolfe flicked his eyes to me. That was my cue to do what I get paid for besides looking good in a suit. "Name," I said. The man tugged his cuffs into compliance. "Martin Kell." "Occupation." He hesitated a fraction, which is the kind of fraction I notice. "Managing secretary of the Epicurean Circle." I glanced at Wolfe. If you've never heard of the Epicurean Circle, that's because it isn't for you. A private dining society with 3 locations around town, a waiting list longer than a tax code, and members who prefer their amuse-bouches with anonymity. You can't buy your way in. You have to be invited by people who pretend not to care about money. Wolfe didn't blink, which in his case means he was interested. "Explain your complaint, Mr. Kell," Wolfe said, in the smallest number of words consistent with accuracy. Kell set his hat on the floor and laced his fingers. He had the careful look of a man who'd been told once that his hands fidget. "Someone is tampering with our orders. Not the kitchen tickets. Those are intact. The dining room orders, they're being duplicated, strategically, at select tables. An entire service will move smoothly, and then," he snapped his fingers, "a member or guest will order a dish twice, precisely the same words, intonation, even pause. The second time, it's as if they don't recall the first." "Hypnosis," I offered. mostly to watch his jaw position. He colored again. "Number, I've consulted a physician. There's nothing physically wrong with the people who do it. They don't remember repeating themselves. They're embarrassed and angry when told. The incidents are escalating. Last week, a financier's wife burst into tears. A week before, a critic stormed out and wrote. Well, she wrote. Names, Wolfe said. You'll supply a list. I brought one. Kell touched his breast pocket but didn't withdraw the envelope, as if it were a live mouse that might bolt. I'm being watched, followed. I believe the duplications are a signal, or a test. I thought if I demonstrated it, here, Mr. Wolfe would understand. You presumed on my house, Wolfe murmured. You presumed on Fritz. Kell swallowed. I apologize. But the phrasing matters. The words are exact. A lemon tart, if you please. With that exact little lift on please. It always begins with desserts or aperitifs. It wants to be noticed. He had me there. There are a dozen ways to ask Fritz for anything edible, and only one that makes him cock his head like a pointer. I'd heard that lift. So had Wolfe. Why you? I asked. You're the managing secretary. You mind the books and the members. Why would a saboteur make you nervous enough to repeat yourself in my kitchen? Kell's eyes twitched to the office windows, as if the fancy brick of 35th Street could hide eavesdroppers. Because the circle is being squeezed from inside, and because I may have... He checked himself, recalculated. There are people who would like me, blamed. If I come to you, Mr. Wolfe, and you say publicly that it isn't me, that ends it. Pfui, Wolfe said, not unkindly. Guilt is not absolved by proclamation. It is displaced by proof. Who has reason to impair the circle's reputation? Kell's fingers unlocked. He produced the envelope, a stiff cream thing with the circle's watermark, faint as a whisper. I took it and slid out a single typed sheet. It had the tidy columns of a man who believes rows can contain human nature. Dates, rooms, tables, names, dishes, and in a last column, a neat D for duplication. The pattern wasn't loud, but it had rhythm. Salons A and C, little overlap. Dessert, aperitif, amuse, one main course, an outlier. Names, I said again, and Kell complied. Chef, Anton Bello. He's brilliant, temperamental, and convinced the board undervalues him. Maitre D. Rinaldo Ferretti, Rizzo, equally brilliant at remembering names and enemies. A critic, Camilla Dree. She came twice, and the second time she was duplicated. She wrote something pointed. A member, Harold Buxley. He lost 6 figures in a bad market and blames the world one course at a time. And my bookkeeper, Peter Kell, my brother. Wolfe splayed his fingers on the chair arms. You dismissed your brother. I had to, Kell said quickly. Irregularities appeared in the accounts. Small, almost clever. He said they were timing errors. The auditors say that's a charming story. Dates? I asked, studying the pattern. When did the duplication start? Kell wet his lip. 3 months ago, faintly. A glass of Lillet twice. Then nothing for 2 weeks. Then a cluster, 4 nights in a row. It has accelerated in the last 10 days. Before or after you dismissed your brother? Wolfe asked. After. A week after. If you know Wolfe, you know that his face can do math without the numbers showing. And you are followed. I feel it. A man with the unobtrusive shoes of a professional. Sometimes a woman, hat brim low. They keep a cab between us, or a shop window. If I stop, they stop. If I turn, they invent a reason to look elsewhere. He forced a laugh. I sound paranoid. You sound observed, Wolfe said. The difference lies in whether you are interesting enough to merit the trouble. Do you carry records? Kell looked guilty. Sometimes. I took home a copy of member changes to review at night, addresses, notes about preferences. I'm careful. Bah, this is not a sacristy. Why me? Wolfe's lids fell half an inch. You know my terms. My house, my hours. I will not visit your temples. I'm not asking you to. Kell sat forward, the first bold move he'd made. I'm asking you to let me bring them here. Bring whom? I asked. The circle, he said, and then, realizing how that sounded in this room, he moderated. Not everyone. The people who could be doing this. I can get them, to you naturally, a private tasting, a consultation, a conversation about reputation. Mr. Wolfe, your name travels in dining rooms. If you so much as mention you have a view on the ethics of amuse-bouche, 10 men will bring clipboards. I couldn't help it. I smiled. You've done your homework. He's done enough, Wolfe said. But I do not bait crowds. I select my fish. Mr. Kell, you will leave that list. You will also leave the addresses of your chef, your maître d', your critic, your financier, and your brother. Goodwin will visit them, I will not. If, during his visits, a diner duplicates his order, once, I shall consider it an act of providence. If not, I shall rely on more pedestrian methods. Kell's shoulders slumped in relief, which meant he had expected worse. He rose, but Wolfe had another finger to raise. Fees, he said, and if you think I'm going to embarrass us both by itemizing, you're wrong. We charge what we charge. Kell didn't blanch, not even at the part that makes dentists dig in their heels. He agreed, which is the first step toward being fleeced or saved. When he'd signed, I pocketed the sheet. One more thing, I said. Why repeat here? Why risk offending the only man who despises having his routine scratched? Kell's throat worked. Because the person does it to me. It happened in rooms where I was present. I wanted to see if I'd be the trigger, or if the words were. He tried a smile that didn't make it to his eyes. I thought perhaps your kitchen was safer than mine. Fritz, who moves softer than a cat, chose that moment to appear with a tray. He served Wolfe his beer and me my coffee, and set by Kell a glass of water with a slice of lemon so neat it could have been measured with a compass. He also put down a small plate with a single shortbread round, delicate as a promise. Kell stared like a beggar at a window. You may, Wolfe said grudgingly, on condition you do not order it again. Kell lifted it, and that's when the doorbell rang. Our bell doesn't jangle, it announces. I went. On the stoop was a boy of 14 with a cap, an envelope, and the shifty eye that says he's been paid to be invisible. For Mr. Wolfe, he said, trying to peer past me. I took it, tipped him, and closed the door on whatever curiosity he'd brought from the curb. The envelope was plain, no watermark, no return address. Inside was a single menu card, embossed in a style I recognized from the circle. That same careful cream, the same type. 3 items were penciled, with tiny X's beside them: martini, lemon tart, consommé. Each item had been marked twice, 2 tiny X's on the same line as if made by a patient hand returning to its mischief. No note, no signature. The paper held a perfume of citrus that wasn't Fritz's. Kell's hand went to his mouth. That menu was in my office yesterday, he breathed. It's used for training new staff on how to describe courses. Cadence, tone. It shouldn't be here. It is, I said. How did it get from your office to my hall? His eyes cut to me, then to Wolfe. I don't know. You were followed, Wolfe said, and either you were frisked by fate or someone you trust is indifferent to boundaries. Archie. Right, I said, and went to the front hall. The air had that faint lemon-top note that likes to sit on wood. It trailed up from the stoop like a polite intruder. I opened the door and looked at the street. The boy was gone. Across the way, a sedan idled. No hat brim, no face we know. I shut it again and returned to the office, where Wolfe had not moved and Kell had not touched his water. You will go nowhere alone, Mr. Kell. Wolfe said. For the next 48 hours, you will be either in your rooms, here, or attached to Mr. Goodwin like a burr on a terrier. You will inform your circle you are indisposed and will delegate. You will give me the name of the person who controls access to training materials. Kell coughed out a name. Rizzo, the maitre d'. He claims the cadence is his domain. Of course, Wolfe said dryly. He would. Mr. Goodwin, you will see Chef Bello first. He is more combustible and thus more likely to betray useful ash. Then Ms. Dree. If she has written recently, she will have convinced herself she is impartial, a condition ripe for exploitation. Then Mr. Buxley, because money like his leaks in interesting patterns. Then the brother. You're leaving the brother for dessert, I said. I'm not hungry, Wolfe said, and glanced toward the menu with its double marks. Not for that. One more thing, Mr. Kell. In your office at the Circle, what typeface is used on your internal memos? Kell blinked. Centaur. Why? Because that menu is not set in Centaur, Wolfe said, which means it is not your training print. It is a copy of your copy, made by someone who understands how you see and plans to show you the same thing with a different angle. A duplication of a duplication. Kell's mouth fell open, stayed there, and then closed with a click. If he had been a dish, he would have been underdone. You'll be staying for an hour, Wolfe said, as if we were discussing the weather. Fritz will feed you something that isn't tart. Archie will telephone Saul Panzer. Mr. Kell, during that hour you will write down every instance in the last 3 months in which you have used the exact phrase, if you please, with anyone inside the circle. It will be tedious. Endure it. Precision is tonic. I went to the phone. Saul answers on the 2nd ring when he's awake and on the 10th when he's asleep. This time he hit 3. Panzer. Archie, we've got a dining society with a stutter. House call. Whose house? Ours first, then a chef's ego. I'll brief you in the cab. Fine, he said. I'll bring my unobtrusive shoes. I hung up and turned back. Kell had started writing, slowly, like a man tracing his own shadow. Wolfe sipped his beer and watched the words appear as if they were seedlings he could identify by shape. The brown stone had been scratched, yes, but not gouged. That would come later if we let it. We wouldn't. I slid the typed sheet, the menu, and Kell's list into a folder and tucked it under my arm. If the saboteur wanted a second serving, I was happy to be the waiter. Saul arrived looking like he'd been poured into his coat by a conscientious bartender. Neat, quiet, and with just enough presence to be forgettable. He took in Kell at the desk, the folded menu on Wolfe's blotter, and the way Wolfe's eyelids had descended to the meditative line that means he's working and pretending not to. Saul's glance found me. I gave him the short form. Dining club, duplicated orders, a menu that traveled without visible legs, and a secretary who was either being framed by poetry or strangled by it. Saul listened, hands in his pockets, weight balanced like a man on a slow elevator. You want me riding shotgun on the kitchen call, he said, which saved me a sentence. Right. Chef first, I said. Wolfe thinks Bello is the kind to shed sparks when you look at him. Chefs tend to, Saul said mildly. They live between fire and knives. Kell finished the first page of his assignment like a student who discovered long division after lunch. He looked up. Chef Bello will be preparing for dinner. He's exacting about his mise en place. If you need a pretext, Mr. Kell, I said, I can talk my way into a convent at midnight. We'll manage. I gathered the folder with the typed list and the twice-ticked menu and slid them under my arm. You'll stay put, as instructed. Fritz will guard you with shortbread. Kell attempted a smile and didn't land it. I left him to his penance and followed Saul out to the curb. The sedan across the street had decided it was tired of idling. It was gone. That didn't mean it had forgotten us. It meant it had a longer memory than the meter made. We took a cab to the Circle's uptown location because Saul prefers glass between himself and curiosity. On the ride, I ran the pattern again out loud, the way a man hums to find a key. Desserts and aperitifs doubled, a single main course as an outlier, and the cadence, if you please, like a handle everyone had been told to grab. Saul nodded along at the right places and frowned at the outlier. "Main course duplicated," he repeated. "Why that one?" "Good question," I said. "If they were testing the room, you keep it to small plates. A main clogs the kitchen and draws attention. Maybe that was the point. Maybe they wanted a mess." "Or a message," Saul said. The Circle's canopy was the expensive kind that pretends it has always been there. We moved through the vestibule, where a hostess with a posture like arithmetic tried to stop us with a smile and a query about membership. I told her we were expected. That was a lie. Lies like that are a credit card. You use them and pay later. It worked. She glanced toward the dining room, saw no maitre d' in range to contradict me, and waved us toward a corridor that smelled like money's idea of time. The kitchen made its own weather. Heat rolled out in tidy waves, cut by the staccato of knives. I stepped in with the confidence of a man about to be ejected, and was halfway ready to plant when the ejector arrived. Tall, heavy forearms, hair pinned back by ego, and a face that believed salt answered most questions. Chef Anton Bello turned from a station where a junior was dissecting fennel with the concentration of a monk. "This is a closed kitchen," Bello announced, every syllable buttered with accent and threat. "Then open it a crack," I said. "Archie Goodwin, with Panzer. We're consulting on a private matter for your managing secretary." He looked us over. "Chefs don't like men in suits near their stovetops. We carry lint." "Kell," he said, with a curl that could have flavored the soup. "What does he want now?" "Clarity," I said. "You've had duplicated orders." "I've had confusion," Bello corrected, spreading his fingers. His hands were clean, which told me he'd just washed after touching something he wanted no one to connect him to. "The dining room speaks twice. I cook once. Then I must cook again, and timing is a symphony, and Kell waves his lists like a conductor who never learned an instrument." "The words come twice," Saul said, his voice pure linen. "Exact, down to cadence. You heard it?" Bello's eyes narrowed. "From the pass, I hear everything. Rizzo repeats like a parrot when he wants to show he is king. The guests repeat when they are trying to be precious, but yes, there were moments. A lady asks for a tart, then later asks for the tart she has just eaten. Embarrassment, she blames me, of course. A critic, I said. Camilla Dree. He let a smile out for a second, then called it back. She is a cannibal who writes at a child's desk. Yes, she was duplicated, and she ran away not to be seen as foolish. She wrote something about memory and menu fatigue, that we were repeating ourselves. She is clever when she is cowardly. Anyone in your kitchen who would enjoy a little sabotage? I asked. Petty injuries, small humiliations, that kind of fun. My kitchen is an orchestra, Bello said. Anyone off tempo is out. He paused, considered pride, swallowed some of it. There is a boy, well, a young man, Matteo, who resents that chopping fennel is not the same as composing an aria. If I tell him to taste and adjust, he adjusts and then complains I have no vision. He has a girlfriend in the front, a runner who thinks three-top is a kind of tree. But they are children, not saboteurs. If you want sabotage, look where power is. At the door with Rizzo or in the office with Kell. You and Kell don't waltz, I observed. He snorted. Kell wants numbers to sing. I want flavors to obey. He says there is a budget. I say there is a dish. He says no truffles in April. I say the season is a god, not a book. Bello flicked a towel to a junior. Do I look like a man who whispers in dining rooms? I throw pans when I'm angry. People hear that. You throw them at whom? Saul asked. Not at people. Bello said, affronted. At the idea of them. Your training menus, I said. Who handles them? Training, he said, as if I had asked who breathed air. Rizzo keeps the cards in his desk because he likes to own the words. He says how to say consommé in a tone that makes men feel small. I say, serve the broth hot and clear and it will do the talking. Rizzo's desk locked, Saul said. Bello eyed him with the awareness of a man who understands keys. It has a lock. Whether it is locked is a matter of Rizzo's theater. I let that settle while I watched the line. Stations humming, eyes sharp, no slack. If a saboteur had incubated here, he'd done it without turning down the heat. The main course duplication, I said, turning back. Which dish? Bello made a face that mixed pride with irritation. A squab, roasted and presented with charred spring onions and a reduction I would not describe to my priest. It is a dish that cannot be made twice without a cost to rhythm. He lifted his chin. The second squab was perfect. Meaning, Saul said, whoever asked for the repeat didn't care about making you look bad. Or they cared about making me angry, Bello corrected, which is easier than making me look bad. We had reached the end of his patience and the beginning of dinner prep. I left him my card to give Pride something to fold and slide into a pocket, and we backed out to the corridor. The maitre d' was there when we hit the front. Rinaldo Ferretti, Rizzo to those he disliked, sleek, scented, and balanced on shoes that cost more than a month's rent for a room you wouldn't invite me to. He had the smile of a snake who'd gone to finishing school. Mr. Goodwin, he said, making it sound like a garnish. Mr. Panzer, if you have finished unsettling my kitchen, perhaps you could return to your own. We will, I said pleasantly. But we hate to leave a man without a compliment. Your training cards are one of the wonders of the modern world. May I see one to enrich my vocabulary? The smile had a tremor. They are proprietary. The cadence is part of our experience. Experience duplicated, I said, and watched the flinch he didn't want me to see. One of your cards took a walk. It strolled to my house this afternoon. I don't see how that involves me, he said. Cards are kept secure. Locked? Saul asked. Of course. And who has the key? I said. Rizzo's eyes were stones in a blue river. I do. And the managing secretary, and perhaps, on a wet Tuesday, God. I'd like to see your desk, I said. I'd like to see you disappear, he said, still smiling. We are not aligned in our desires. Camilla Dree, I said, changing lanes. She's on your banned list yet? He gave a small shrug. Critics are never banned. They ban themselves. She will return when she wants to write about redemption. Which you will provide, I said. I provide theater. Redemption is a flavor some patrons bring in their pockets. There's a point where pushing turns curiosity into alarm. I let it ride there and stepped back. We'll be in touch, I said, which is a sentence that means nothing and everything, and we left him marinating in his scent. Outside, Saul angled his head, inhaling the city the way a man reads a page. We should catch Dree before she writes again, he said. Her office or her haunt? I asked. Her haunt, Saul said. She'll be wherever people can overhear her being clever. He was right. We found her at a bar in the East 50s where the lamps are low and the drinks come with stories you can quote. Camilla Dree was small, bony, with hair cut like an idea and a mouth that preferred verbs. She was perched on a stool, as if she'd ordered the furniture not to wobble. The bartender gave us the look he reserves for men who approach women who tip well. I gave him the nod that says we won't disturb the margins. Miss Dree, I said, slipping on to the neighboring stool. Goodwin, with Panzer. We're collecting repeats. She slid us a glance. Then you should go to Broadway. They specialize. You ordered a lemon tart twice, I said. With a lift on, please. She winced. You do this to ladies often, Mr. Goodwin. Recite their humiliations until they buy you a drink. Only when the humiliation was imported, I said. You remember the second order? I remember the first, she said. I remember thinking the tart was too eager to be liked. I remember hearing my own voice a few minutes later, like I was catching a rerun. Then Rizzo did that thing with his eyebrow that makes you feel like you've been edited. I left before the room could warm its hands. Anyone speak to you before, during, or after? Saul asked, and the question was so gentle she answered it. A woman washed her hands next to me and the ladies and said, "The cadence is the thing, don't you agree?" I said, "Not if the flavor is honest." She said, "Flavor is what you're told it is," and smiled in a way that made me tip less. She had one of those hats that intends to be remembered. Describe her, I said. Not young, not old, polished to an idea of herself, Dree said. Perfume with citrus up front and something mean underneath. She could have been a donor or a spy. Same skill set. Did you write after? I asked. I wrote, she said. Not the piece I'd intended. Something about menus teaching people what to want. About repetition as comfort and weapon. The circle does not enjoy being accused of anything except excellence. Let them sue me for the wrong synonym. She finished her drink and stood in a way that said we had been indulged and the indulgence was over. One more thing, she said. If you're going to tell Mr. Wolfe anything, tell him that the second order didn't sound exactly like me. It sounded like me if I'd learned to talk by listening to someone describe me. There's a difference. We let her go because chasing critics is like chasing cats. You end up with fur and regret. Outside, a light rain had decided to exercise its rights. Saul tilted his hat brim and we moved toward the curb. Across the street, a woman in a neat little hat turned to look in a window that didn't have anything worth looking at. Citrus passed us on the rain like a rumor. Unobtrusive shoes, I murmured. Half size too small, Saul said. She's making herself shorter to lower her step. Professional, but not ours. We didn't cross. You don't chase a scent into a traffic pattern unless you have to. We took another cab, this time toward a building on Park, where Harold Buxley kept a perch. On the ride, I distributed what we had like playing cards. Chef proud and angry, maitre d' proprietary with keys, critic duplicated and prodded by a hat with citrus, and the training card, a copy with the wrong typeface. Someone is sampling Kell's world and plating it with their own touch, I said. They want him to see his life through their menu. Or they want Wolfe to, Saul said. Buxley's lobby had the kind of marble that persuades you not to sneeze. We got as far as a desk with a woman whose glasses could slice cheese before the elevator delivered Mr. Buxley to us without the trouble of going up. He was coming in, not out, tall, tanned, and wearing leisure like a uniform. He saw us, recognized Trouble Bites tailoring, and gave a made-to-measure smile. Gentlemen, he said, if you're selling better markets, you're late by a decade. We're buying a minute, I said. Harold Buxley? Depends, he said. Who's asking? Goodwin, Panzer. We're inquiring on behalf of the Circle. You doubled a main course. He laughed, and it wasn't pretty. Darling, I double everything. That squab was magnifique. If they wanted to bring me another bird, who was I to deny culture? You ordered it twice, I said. Same words, same pauses. He squinted. Did I? Then consider it a performance. I've done worse. Anyone nudge you? Saul said. Suggest you were peckish, lean on cadence? Everyone nudges me, Buxley said. Especially women with hats. They tell me where the art is and how much to pay. I ignore half and regret the rest. He moved to go and stopped himself with a sigh shaped like money. If you're looking for a conspiracy, boys, you'll find a club. That's what clubs are. I'll tell you this. Rizzo thinks words are currency. He spends them to show you your balance. Bello thinks food is truth. Kell thinks rules are religion. The only person who looked like she was having fun was a woman who told me I had excellent taste and then laughed when I asked her name. Hat, I said. Black with bite. he agreed. He pressed the elevator button with a finger that had opinions. Now, if you'll allow me, I have a portfolio to pretend I understand. We let him go. The rain had stiffened into something more determined by the time we reached the curb. I felt the day gathering itself. Somewhere behind the weather, a person who enjoyed repetition and theater was watching us collect their props. "Brother next," I said. "Dessert." Saul checked his watch. "And then back to Wolfe, before the kitchen closes." He glanced toward the street where a dark sedan hovered and then drifted. "We're being allowed to see the show." "Sure," I said, "but we get to pick the seats." Peter Kell's building had the wounded dignity of a man who once wore tails and now makes do with a clean collar. The hallway smelled like varnish, remembering better days. We climbed because the elevator wanted to be asked twice and my patience was already rented out. 3rd floor, end unit. Saul pressed the buzzer once. The door opened half an inch and a chain said hello. "Archie Goodwin," I said to the slice, "with Panzer. We're here about your brother's dining club that can't keep its voice to itself." The chain slid, the door widened, and Peter Kell let us in with the caution of a man who's done the arithmetic on strangers. He was built narrower than Martin, eyes quicker, mouth set to default irony. The apartment was tidy to the point of apology, card table doubling as desk, 2 chairs with ambitions of being 4, a bookshelf that had learned to carry more than books. On the table sat a metronome ticking a modest tempo, flicking its little arm like a conductor with small hopes. "You're early," he said, which was odd because we hadn't made an appointment. He closed the door, looked at Saul's shoes, my face, and the folder under my arm. "Which one hired you, Martin or the Circle?" "Wolfe hired Wolfe," I said. "Martin engaged him. We're collecting the pieces before someone repeats them for us." He tipped his head toward the metronome and clicked it silent with a finger. "Sorry. Habit. Precision is a tonic. Martin taught me that, which is funny if you like your humor banked." "You were his bookkeeper," Saul said, glancing around as if the walls might answer. "Then you weren't." "Then I wasn't," Peter agreed. "Numbers ask less than people, but they still complain when you move them. I moved some, not into my pocket, however much the auditors wanted to find a villain with my name attached. I smoothed timing. The Circle calls it fraud when timing isn't a straight line. I call it keeping the floor from squeaking." "The duplication started after you left," I said. He smiled with half his mouth. "Is this the part where I rub my hands and confess to haunting the dining room with a ghost voice?" "It's the part where you tell me whether you handled training cards," I said. "Menus on cream stock with cadence notes. One of them took a walk this afternoon." I put our visitor's menu on the card table. He didn't touch it. He leaned, squinted, and made a face. "Not ours." "Not the font," I said. "Not the weight," he said. "Rizzo is a snob about paper. He says guests can feel quality in their fingertips. He's not wrong, he's just unbearable. That's a copy of our copy." "Copy made by whom?" Saul asked. Peter did what honest people do when they're about to be honest. He sighed first. "I made some scans of the cards when I was still in the office. Before I was fired. Not many. 2, maybe 3. I was applying for a job with a hospitality consultancy that turns out to be 3 people and a laptop. They wanted examples of training processes I'd implemented. I hadn't implemented them. Rizzo had. But I had access, and I was trying to look useful. I printed the scans at a shop on Lex because the office printer leaves a telltale nick and I wasn't eager to drop that breadcrumb. "Date?" Saul said. Peter thought, chased the memory, and caught it by the tail. 2 weeks after they told me to clear my desk. Tuesday. Rain. The guy behind the counter had a tattoo of a whisker-thin fork on his forearm like he was goofing on fate. "Do you still have the files?" I asked. "I deleted them," he said. "Which I know means nothing to men who can resurrect the past from a smudge on a hard drive." But I did. I also threw out the prints. At least I think I did. Think, Saul said gently. He spread his fingers. A folder went missing that week. I blamed the move, the boxes, my own stupidity. It could have been the folder with the prints. It could have been the folder with my lease. I was busy not being employed. Anyone interested in your job hunt? I asked. A woman with a hat, citrus perfume, a way of sounding like an echo that wants a raise. That got his full attention. She asked to meet about the consultancy, said her firm connects culinary brands with systems. I said I was a bookkeeper with a decent palate and a talent for making chefs hate me less. She laughed. We met in a coffee shop on Madison. She wore a hat, black, small brim like punctuation. She asked questions that were too specific for a stranger. Who has keys? Who makes the cadence cards? Where the desk is? How many copies exist? I told her I wasn't a thief, which is a statement that convinces no one. She left a note for me with the barista when I went to the restroom. It said, "The cadence is the thing." What did you bring to that meeting? Saul asked. My resume. The names of 2 suppliers who still speak to me. A notebook. He pointed to a slim black book on the shelf. She didn't touch it, or I didn't see her touch it. When I got home, a page was gone. I don't tear pages from notebooks. That's a religion. I picked up the notebook, flipped, found the surgical absence. No ragged edge. A blade had done the politeness. Saul peered at the spine and nodded to himself. You carry this in your inside pocket. Left, Peter said. Why? Pocket fabric is abraded. Knife tip worked from below. She could have palmed the slip while she set down her cup. Saul set the book back as if not to startle it. Your brother thinks you make convenient blame, I said. Peter's laugh was short. Martin thinks in 2 columns. Order and everything else. I've always been everything else. But he wouldn't hire Wolves if he thought he could handle this with ledgers. Wolfe hired himself, I said, because if you don't keep the record straight, Wolfe will. Tell me about Rizzo. He's a poet manqué, Peter said, almost fondly, which told me how complicated this family was even when it looked simple. He thinks a dining room can be tuned like a string quartet. He hates that money breaks rhythm. He loves that he can correct it with a gesture. He believes cadence is power. And Bello? I asked. Bello believes power is heat, Peter said. He's less dangerous because he's obvious. If someone is playing repetition games, they'll prefer a room where words matter. Bello's room is all knives. He looked at the menu again without touching it. Who sent that to you? Not Martin. He doesn't know where you live. A boy with a cap, I said. A sedan disagreeing with the curb. People with unobtrusive shoes. Does any of that ring a bell? Sounds like a Tuesday, he said, and then his face altered, like a man hearing a tune from the next room. There's one more thing. A set of key tags went missing the week before I was fired. We keep spares in the office safe for when Rizzo theatrically loses his set. Martin said I'd probably misfiled them. The auditors didn't care. No one did, because nothing was broken. But if someone wanted to stage whispers in the dining room, having access to staff areas helps. Which tags? Saul asked. Training room, office, lounge corridor. Not the safe. Those are 2-factor. But if you wanted to stand near the ladies and murmur about cadence while a critic washed her hands, you'd like the corridor tag. We left him with the metronome starting itself again on a tired tick and went back into the hallway where varnish tried its best. On the 2nd floor landing, a woman with a grocery bag and neat shoes paused to let us pass. Citrus lifted off her scarf and then blew away as the door at the end opened, and a man with a toolbox stepped out, glanced, and decided we were termites that didn't concern him. We didn't chase either of them. When your quarry leaves perfume like punctuation, you don't read the sentence too fast. We took a cab back to the brownstone because Wolfe expects reports while the beer is still agreeable. Fritz let us in with eyebrows that conveyed that Kell had written like a monk and eaten like a sparrow. The office had that patient quiet it gets when Wolfe is thinking in heavy furniture. He looked up as we entered, and if you don't believe a man can look up and say 30 words with his eyelids, you haven't worked for Nero Wolfe. I gave it to him clean. Bellow combustible but not sloppy, Rizzo proprietary with keys and theatre, Dree nudged by a hat with citrus and a philosophy degree, Buxley amused and compliant, and Peter with his scans, his copy shop, his missing page, and his key tags that had learned to walk. Wolfe listened with the exactness of a man tasting broth for an off note. When I got to the metronome, he grunted. When I mentioned the missing corridor tag, he closed his eyes as if he could see a floor plan. "Saul," he said, "locate the print shop on Lexington and procure the record of Mr. Peter Kell's job. Obtain the originals if possible. Ascertain whether a duplicate was requested. By whom, when, and with what pretext." "On it," Saul said. "Archie," Wolfe went on, "you will telephone Mr. Rinaldo Ferretti and inform him that I shall host here a consultation on reputation and service at 7:30 tomorrow evening. In attendance will be Mr. Ferretti, Chef Bellow, Miss Dree, Mr. Buxley, and Mr. Martin Kell. Exclude the brother for the moment. We will not spare him later if we shouldn't. Offer them nothing except the opportunity to hear me disapprove of modern claptrap. They will come." "You hate gatherings," I said. "I do," he said, "but I abhor disorder more. If a saboteur uses repetition to demonstrate command of a room, we will remove the room and see what remains." He turned his gaze to Fritz, who had appeared quietly with a tray, and the expression he reserves for moments when the brownstone is asked to perform tricks. "Fritz, for tomorrow evening, observe the following: a proper martini, stirred, consommé of clarity sufficient to shame a mirror, and a lemon tart that makes a man reluctant to speak for fear of ruining it. Serve them only when I say. We will see who orders twice." Fritz inclined his head, and the corner of his mouth made a pact with pride. "Yes, sir." "Mr. Kell?" Wolfe said, shifting his attention to our client, who was still at the desk with his list of "if you pleases," the handwriting cramped into obedience. Kell looked up with a start, like a boy caught whispering in church. "Yes?" "You will. Telephone Mr. Ferretti and invite him in my name as well," Wolfe said. "He will pretend to be offended. You will allow him to complete the performance. Then you will say, 'If you please,' and he will come." Kell grimaced. "You intend to trigger him?" "I intend to measure him," Wolfe said. "The woman with the hat is cultivating echoes. We will give her a new room and new angles and see if her parlor trick has range." "Assuming she comes," I said. "She will," Wolfe said. "She has announced herself to too many mirrors to resist one more." The doorbell announced again. I went. This time it wasn't a boy. It was a florist's assistant with forearms like balusters and an arrangement that could have fed a family if you boiled it and surrendered. The card read, in a tidy hand, "For Mr. Kell, to sweeten a bitter week, if you please." No name. The perfume rising from the leaves had that citrus top note with something mean underneath. I brought it in and set it on the side table where Wolfe lets harmless things look innocent. He did not look at the flowers. He looked at the card. "Saul," he said. "Already seen," Saul murmured. Stationer's block on the back. "Lila and Dean, West 54th. Wolfe made a small sound, like a man agreeing with his own impatience. "Archie, telephone Ferretti, then Ms. Dree, then Mr. Buxley. Use different pretexts calibrated to their vanities. Do not lie more than necessary. It breeds in the carpet. Saul, attend to Lexington, then 54th. Mr. Kell, stop writing and go upstairs. Fritz will give you something hot and restorative. Wear it like penance." Kell gathered his pages with the care of a man who has learned that paper cuts. I stood at the phone and started my chorus. Rizzo performed his outrage with all the vowels, then accepted. Bello grunted that he would not drink a martini, and then asked if there would be bread. I said there would be what there would be. He said he was not a child and would bring his own palate. Dree was the easiest. I told her Wolfe intended to lecture her about ethics and dessert. She said she would come to see if ethics paired well with meringue. Buxley asked if this was a party or an intervention and decided he was overdue for both. When I hung up, Wolfe had finally lifted the florist's card between two fingers. He turned it over, read the block, and put it down as if returning a pawn to the board. "Someone," he said, "is conducting with a metronome only they can hear. They have moved us onto their staff paper. Tomorrow we will change the key." He reached not for the beer, he'd finished that, but for the pencil that marks the place in his book. He propped it back on the arm of the chair and closed his eyes. If you think that meant the conversation was over, you haven't seen a mind take a step you can't hear. The brownstone settled around us, listening. On the table, the florist's arrangement pretended to be just green. The card, with its "if you please," lay where he'd set it, neat as a dare. Morning in the brownstone is like a symphony you can set your watch by. Wolfe with the orchids from 9 to 11, me with the mail and the phone, Fritz with a breakfast that reminds you the day can be civilized if you meet it halfway. By 8:50, I'd already set the chairs in Wolfe's office the way he likes them when he plans to look down a row of human beings and peel them without getting up. Two facing the desk on the Persian, Bello and Rizzo can glare at each other there. Two flanking the globe for Dree and Buxley, and the red leather visitor for Kell, close enough to Wolfe to feel judged, but far enough that his knees won't tap the desk. I tucked the florist card into a folder with the double-marked menu and our notes, slid the folder inside the right-hand drawer, and checked the lock out of habit. The day wasn't going to be gentle, so I put the room in shape to give it a chance. Wolfe came down at 11:03, which for him is a reckless display of spontaneity. He lowered into the chair, aimed his eyes at nothing in particular, and reached for the bell pull. Fritz arrived with coffee and a plate of buttered rolls that would have made a priest cancel a fast. Wolfe took one, leaned back, and gave me a glance that said he expected the world to report in. Before I could, the phone rang. I took it. Nero Wolfe's residence. "Mr. Goodwin," said Rizzo's voice, smooth as a polished step. "Confirming the consultation this evening, 7:30 sharp, appropriate attire, appropriate minds. The Circle appreciates the invitation." "Fine," I said. "Try not to rehearse your eyebrows too hard. They're already famous." He chuckled, swore politely he'd attend, and hung up. I started to tell Wolfe when the phone rang again. Same bell note, same speed. I scooped it up. "Mr. Goodwin," said Rizzo's voice, smooth as the same step, and he walked the same sentence from the same start to the same period. "Confirming the consultation this evening, 7:30 sharp, appropriate attire, appropriate minds. The Circle appreciates the invitation." I let him reach the period. "You just called," I said. "I beg your pardon," he said, except it wasn't a question. It was a punctuation mark. "You? 2 minutes ago." A breath, then a faint throat clearing I didn't remember from the first call. "I assure you, Mr. Goodwin, I've just returned from a supplier and only now telephoned." "Sure," I said. "We'll compare notes at 7:30 sharp." I hung up and looked at Wolfe. He had not moved. That doesn't mean he hadn't heard it. "Twice," I said. Same words, same cadence. The second had a little gravel on the throat. "Room tone?" he asked. "Different," I said. "First call sounded like carpet. Second like tile. I don't know which floor your man prefers." He grunted, which in our dialect means not nothing. He took another roll and dissected it with a thumb, watching the crumb structure like it owed him rent. The doorbell chimed. Fritz answered. His footfalls told me the guest had light shoes. Saul came in with the weather on his coat and a paper bag under his arm. Lexington print shop, he said, setting the bag on the side table. The clerk with the fork tattoo remembered Peter Kell and his scans. 1 week later, a woman orders a second set from the same files. She had the file names, asked for heavier cream, requested a subtle shift from Centaur to Garamond. For legibility, she said, and paid cash. She wore gloves. The clerk remembers citrus and a hat that didn't intend to be invisible. Receipt? I asked. She asked them not to print one, Saul said. The clerk printed anyway because he's a coward twice. Once for her, once for his boss. He filed it. I have it. He slid out a thin, heat-printed strip in a hand that doesn't smudge. No name, but a timestamp. 2:13 in the afternoon, the same Tuesday, Peter remembers. She left with 2 envelopes. The clerk says she spoke like she was reading his thoughts and correcting his grammar. Stationer? Wolfe asked. Lila and Dean, Saul said. They sell everything that can make words look like money. Yesterday, a floral card went out with that exact block on the back. Buyer requested blank card and a separate tiny envelope with, "If you please," written in a neat hand. Store clerk wrote it. Customer dictated. Cash again. Same citrus. Clerk says bergamot, and I believe him. His boyfriend's a perfumer. Hat, small brim, gloves. She called the arrangement a bribe disguised as decor. She is curating her echo, Wolfe said. Saul nodded. I asked about deliveries to 35th Street. 2 in the last month. Different senders, both anonymous, both cash. The boy who runs the loop for them is 14, Cap, nervous. Same boy you saw. I moved the florist card from the folder to the blotter. Wolfe didn't touch it. He was looking past it at the air, which meant he was lining us up on that staff paper he likes. Any joy on the copy shop's cameras? I asked. They have a dome, Saul said, but it's cosmetic. Boss thinks cameras make honesty. The deli across the street has the real thing. I got a clip. We'll see her hat, not her face. Wolfe's lids dropped. We know enough of her face, he said. She prefers to be seen from the corner of the eye. Fritz came, not with food, but with a frown. In his hand, he held a small glass vial with a ground glass stopper, the kind he uses when he wants a flavor to behave. The vial had a label in his neat script, lemon oil. The stopper bore a thin crescent of something like wax. Mr. Wolfe, Fritz said, and set the vial on the blotter like a witness. This was not how I left it. What did you leave? Wolfe asked. A quarter, turned tighter, Fritz said, and without wax. I do not seal this vial. I trust gravity and good sense. Today the stopper was eased and replaced with a breath of wax around the rim, as if someone wanted it to look untouched after touching it. Saul's head came up half an inch. When? I do not know, Fritz said. I reached for it to zest for lunch, only a hint, and found the texture wrong. And the scent, he sniffed delicately. Not wrong. Too much the same. Like an echo of lemon with a thin, mean note underneath. Bergamot, Saul said. Fritz inclined his head, impressed against his will. If so, someone wishes to teach me about citrus in my own house. I went to the kitchen with Fritz and checked the shelves. Fritz keeps order that would make a drill sergeant weep. Jars, square to the edge, labels forward, stoppers seated with a proprietary click. Nothing else looked molested. No knife out of line, no extra crumb on the board. Only the lemon oil had been given a courtesy it hadn't asked for. On the counter, the microplane lay where he'd left it, clean and dry. The window latch was secure. The back door bolt wore the dust mark Fritz leaves on it to check if anyone thinks they're Houdini. The dust was smudged a hair. I rubbed it on my finger and it made a small, guilty smear. Back in the office, I told Wolfe. He didn't look at me. He closed his eyes and saw the kitchen. You, he said to no one in particular, have entered my house, touched my food, and presumed to teach my cook. Archie, check the front door latch. On the knight-errant's last visit, he would have made a trial of it. I checked. The latch seated, but the brass plate had a new hairline mark, a thin half-moon, the kind a tool leaves when someone who loves tools too much tries to be gentle. I took a breath, and it gave me the faintest lift of citrus that could have been my imagination if my imagination wore a head. When I came back, the phone rang. I picked it up, ready with acid. A woman's voice, clear and kind, said, "Mr. Goodwin, the florist, Lila and Dean. We wanted to confirm delivery of the arrangement for Mr. Kell, if you please." "Confirmed," I said, and waited, counting in my head. She thanked me, hung up. 2 minutes later, the phone rang again. The same clear kindness, the same words, even the same little courtesy at the end, as if she'd practiced the comma. I let her finish and then asked, "Miss, did you just call?" A pause, and then a different woman's voice, less kind, more inconvenienced. "Sir, we haven't. Are you confirming now?" I did, twice, and put the phone down like it might have grown teeth. Wolfe's eyes had opened. He didn't need my report. He had heard the commas. "They're rehearsing us," I said. "No," Wolfe said. "They are composing us." Saul took the lemon oil vial and held it near his nose without touching the stopper. "If she's the same woman who brushed Dree in, the ladies, and laughed at Buxley, she can stand within arm's reach without being seen. She likes proximity and proof. She also likes risk," I said. "Breaking our latch, caressing Fritz's citrus, phoning my phone like it's a parlor trick. You think she'll walk into this house tonight?" "I expect she'll try," Wolfe said, "but not as herself." I went to my drawer to get the folder with the florist card and the menu. The lock turned smooth. The drawer slid, the folder lay where I'd left it, square to the edge like Fritz's jars. I opened it. Inside, the florist card had been replaced by its twin. The menu, too. Not ours. The copies of our copies. Heavier cream, Garamond instead of Centaur. The tiny differences that tell you someone wants you to see sameness. The original florist card, with the stationer's block rubbed by Saul's thumb, was gone. In its place, an immaculate twin with the block just a hair lower on the back. If I hadn't had my hands on the first, I'd have sworn this was it. I said a word Fritz doesn't approve of and laid them on the blotter. Saul bent, frowned, and pointed with a fingernail so clean it could have been a scalpel. "The pencil X's," he said, "on the menu. On the first, the X's pressed a little, heavy hand. On this, light. And the pressure lines, see? The new X's were drawn over a pad. The first were drawn on wood." Fritz made a small sound, the kind you make when a guest uses your good napkins for a spill. Wolfe's mouth went hard. "Front latch, back bolt, kitchen vial, desk drawer," I said. "Either we're careless or she has keys and a tempo." "Tempo," Wolfe said. Mr. Ferretti's missing tags included a corridor and an office. Mr. Kell's memory of a metronome. Ms. Dree's woman speaking in cadences about cadence. Our interloper is not merely a mimic. She is a conductor, and she is telling us that we will perform on cue. "If she can walk into this office and swap paper under my nose," I said, "she can walk in tonight dressed as a critic, a florist, or an apology." "She won't come obvious," Saul said. "She'll come by echo." Wolfe folded his hands, big and square on the chair arms, and exhaled through his nose as if the air had behaved badly. "Then we will remove echoes." He turned his head an inch. "Fritz." "Yes, sir." "Tonight, when you serve the martinis, you will ask, 'A martini, if you please?' Of each guest. Precisely. You will then serve nothing else until I say. Archie, you will seat Miss Dree near the window, Mr. Buxley where the lamp hums, Mr. Ferretti in the draught from the hall, and Mr. Bellow near the kitchen door. Mr. Kell at my left. You will check the doors, both, and the window stops. You will dust the back bolt again and leave your mark. We will invite our friend to do her worst." "You want her to try the bolt?" I said. I want her to believe she is unseen, Wolfe said. In the belief is the error. Saul tucked the duplicate card back into the folder and slid the folder to the center of the blotter, a little ceremony of defiance. I'll be by the back, he said. Unobtrusive shoes. Bring 2 pairs, Wolfe said. You may need to be in more than one place at once. The day ran on, domesticated by tasks. I called Inspector Kramer because if you don't tell him when you host a party for trouble, he makes you regret it later. He grunted that he had no time for club games and then asked what address to put on the report when it stopped being a game. I gave him our address, which he already knows, and hung up on his cigar. By late afternoon, the office looked like a trap disguised as hospitality. The globe gleamed with a polish you could read in. The chairs waited like patient jurors. Fritz's kitchen made civilized noises and smelled like restraint and lemon. I checked the back bolt. Clean dust, my mark neat as a signature. I checked the front latch. Seated. No new crescent. The phone sat quiet, as if thinking about what it had said. Outside, a sedan found our curb and decided it liked the view. At 6:30, I went to change my tie because vanity is as good a talisman as any. When I came back, the room was the same room. And then, just as the clock in the hall set its little throat to clear, the phone rang once and stopped, as if someone had practiced the sound and preferred the rehearsal. Wolfe opened his eyes and looked at the door, not because he expected it to open, but because he enjoys being right when it does. Archie, he said. I know, I said, and went to the hall to meet our guests and the woman who liked to order twice. The bell chimed again, polite as a butler, and this time it stayed rung long enough to mean business. I opened the door on a procession that looked like a casting call for mistrust and appetitist. First in was Rizzo, sleek and smiling as if he owned the air between my threshold and the carpet. Behind him came Bello, wearing his chef's whites under a coat too small for his shoulders, his jaw already working like he was chewing the evening in advance. Dree appeared next, trim in a suit that made you wonder how a woman that sharp tolerated bar stools. She carried her disdain like a clutch. Buxley sauntered in last, tan polished by self-satisfaction, and winked at me as if we were in on the same joke. Martin Kell trailed, hands clutching his hat like it might shield him from lightning. They all made their way to the office, where Wolfe waited behind the desk like a general behind fortifications. I arranged them as instructed, each in their little zone. Dree by the window where the glass hums, Buxley near the lamp, Rizzo catching the draft, Bello close enough to hear the kitchen door's hinges. Kell eye settled to Wolfe's left, where he could squirm without falling off the chair. Wolfe watched the placement with his eyes half closed, but don't think for a second he missed a beat. Fritz came in with the tray. He was the picture of neutrality, except for the set of his jaw. 5 martinis, precise and cold, glasses catching the light like cut crystal should. He moved with the timing of a metronome, pausing at each guest. "A martini, if you please," he said, the phrase pitched identical each time. Dree gave him a dry yes, Buxley a booming affirmation, Rizzo a sly nod as though he'd rehearsed it himself, Bello a grunt, Kell a stammer. Each glass was placed with ceremony. Fritz left without fuss, and the room had its bait set. "Gentlemen, Ms. Dree." Wolfe's voice filled the space without rising. "You have been invited or compelled into my house, not for amusement, but because the Epicurean circle has been disrupted. Repeated phrases, repeated orders, repeated gestures, like a cracked record. The origin of this echo interests me." Buxley chuckled, ice cubes clinking. "If the echo is good wine, I say let it repeat." "Silence," Wolfe said, and Buxley blinked, affronted but quiet. Rizzo folded one leg over the other, smoothed his trouser crease. "With respect, Mr. Wolfe, the circle's cadence is deliberate. We cultivate ritual. Repetition is elegance." "You mistake dogma for art," Wolfe said. Your rituals have been hijacked. Miss Dree, you were duplicated, were you not? She lifted her glass, sipped. I was, in a manner that made me leave quickly. And you, Mr. Buxley, ordered a second squab with words you don't remember choosing. Wolfe pressed. He grinned. I order plenty I don't remember. Ask my accountant. Wolfe's eyes slid to Bello. Chef, you served the duplicate. Bello's voice was thick. I served perfection twice, though the second was a wound to rhythm. And you, Mr. Ferretti, Wolfe said, guard your training cards like sacraments. Yet one walked and another was made. Copies of copies with altered faces. Do you deny it? Rizzo gave a small shrug. Practiced. If a card left my desk, it did not walk, it was stolen. Wolfe let the word hang a moment. Stolen, he echoed softly. As phrases have been, as cadences have been, and now, perhaps, as identities are. At that, the office went still. The silence had texture, waiting. Wolfe turned his head to me. Archie, the cards, I went to the drawer, pulled the folder, and laid the contents on the blotter. The florist's card, the twice-marked menu, their twins. Wolfe touched none of them. He pointed with one finger. These appeared in this office without my consent. Originals, then duplicates. Someone entered this house unseen. Someone confident that echoes conceal intrusion. Dree set her glass down. You mean someone here? I mean, Wolfe said, someone near. At that exact moment, the front bell chimed again. I left the room, every nerve expecting citrus on the air. At the door stood the florist's boy, cap pulled low, envelope in, hand. Hand, for Mr. Kell, he said, eyes down. I took it, tipped him, closed the door, and slit the envelope before returning. Inside was another menu card, identical stock, identical printing, 3 items marked, each ticked twice. Martini, consommé, lemon tart. I laid it beside the others. The guests leaned, each seeing themselves mirrored and repeated. Kell went pale. This is mockery, he whispered. Not mockery, Wolfe said. Composition. Rizzo bristled. This is absurd. Are we to believe a phantom follows us with paper tricks? No phantom, Wolfe said. A woman, hat brim low, gloves neat, perfume citrus with a mean undernote. She brushed Miss Dree and the ladies. She flattered Mr. Buxley. She borrowed Mr. Peter Kell's notes and made them her own. She has trespassed in my kitchen. She is Buxley looked around as if expecting her to emerge from the curtains. Well, where is she? Wolfe shut his eyes. She is here, by proxy. She cannot resist inserting her echo, and one of you, he opened them, slow as a shutter, has carried her echo in with you. I felt it then, a faint note in the air, lemon and something sharp, riding above the martinis Fritz had poured. Dree smelled it too. She straightened. Bello coughed once, deep as if catching it in his throat. Rizzo's smile slipped. Kell looked ready to bolt. Archie, Wolfe said, calm. Check the kitchen, see what's missing. I went. Fritz was in position by the stove, unruffled, but when I scanned the counter, I saw it. The tart shells were 6 when there should have been 5, each precise as his pride. The 6th was off-center, a hair smaller, its crust pale, not his. I carried it back on a plate. Wolfe lifted a brow. There is our guest, in my house, in my dish. A tart, if you please, not Fritz's hand, but another's. Smell. I bent. Lemon, yes, and that edge of bergamot, sly and mean. She has been here today, Wolfe said. She will not show her face tonight, but she has shown her reach. Someone among you carried it in. Kell stammered. I haven't. No, Wolfe said. Not you. You are the instrument. The echo needs a stage. The one who brought this did so without noticing or without resisting. The room tightened. Eyes flicked. Dree narrowed hers at Rizzo. Bello gripped his knees. Buxley smiled too wide. Wolfe let them simmer, every silence pressing. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will come again. And you will bring your secrets willingly, or I will drag them out by cadence. Tonight you have been measured. The duplication is not a prank, it is orchestration. Someone seeks to control your circle through echo, repetition, and shame. I will not permit it. Not in your club, and never in my house." He signaled with one hand. Fritz, waiting in the hall, entered with consommé that gleamed like glass. He placed it before each guest with that same phrase, "Consommé, if you please," and watched their faces. One of them I saw flinched at the cadence, almost imperceptibly, as though struck on a bruise. I filed it away, because that was the moment the real echo trembled and Wolfe's eyes narrowed just a fraction. The trap wasn't sprung yet, but it was set, and the room knew it. Fritz's consommé did what good broth does. It made people think about clarity while revealing what was cloudy. They lifted spoons and glanced sideways the way city folk do when the subway slows in a tunnel. I watched for that small recoil Wolfe had clocked. It came from the only man in the room who cultivates imperceptible reactions like orchids. Rizzo's lashes ticked once at the phrase, "if you please," like the cadence had reached in and tapped a nerve that wanted to be boss. He hit it well, but hiding is its own semaphore. Buxley leaned back and let the steam tell him he was being served truth. "I don't see what the fuss is," he said to hear himself talk. "If someone wants to double good things, bravo. If they've turned my club into a stage, I'll pay for the box." "That," Wolfe said, "is because money protects you from the injuries of time. For the others, repetition is a whip of habit, embarrassment, or fear." Bellow's spoon clinked, not gently. "Fear is for front of house. In my kitchen we have flame and accuracy." Rizzo didn't look at him. "In your kitchen you have noise. In my room we have control." Dree gave a narrow smile that showed she had notes on both. "And in my column we have adjectives that end careers. You'll live, gentlemen. The question is whether your little society can." Martin Kell almost set his spoon down, but thought of etiquette and made contact with the bowl again. He hadn't noticed that he'd put his hat on the floor by his chair, a habit of men unused to their hat being anything except theirs. I noticed because someone had trained me too, and because the last time a piece of paper traveled from another man's office to ours, it had used a hat as a ferry. "Archie," Wolfe said, and that tone meant he wanted the room's pressure raised by 2 points. "Our guests are warm. Let us give them temperature. Ask each in turn what they ordered on the evenings in question. Use their phrasing if they gave you any." I took a position at the corner of the desk where I could see faces and hands, both. "Miss Dree," I said, "you're tart." She looked at me like I was a menu item she hadn't decided on. "I asked for a lemon tart, if you please." "Exactly like that?" I asked mildly. "Exactly like that," she said, except for the moment I watched my voice happen elsewhere. "Mr. Buxley," I said, "you're squab." His eyes slid to the middle distance, where a different man's mirror might have been. I said, "Bring me another squab, if you please." "Those words are not yours," Rizzo put in, smooth and quick. "You speak in demands, not requests. And you speak like you've been paid by punctuation," Buxley shot back. "Chef," I said, before the front of house and back of house turned the brownstone into a symposium on who could sneer better. "You heard the duplication from the pass. Repeat it." Bello moved his mouth around the shape of the sentence, tasting it, despising the flavor. "A squab, if you please," he said, and his face did something, a tiny wince, as if the words had the acidity of a lemon on an unhealed cut. "Mr. Ferretti," I said, "at table, when you are teaching the room the way it wishes to speak, do you instruct them to lift on please?" "Cadence is a ladder," Rizzo said. "You cannot reach the proper tone without the last rung." "Answer," Wolfe said, so quiet and so heavy it pinned the syllables to the rug. Rizzo inclined his head. "Yes." I teach the lift. Guests respond to rhythm. It makes them feel taken care of. Wolfe closed his eyes as if he needed darkness to taste the air. And it makes them cumbersome instruments, he said. Easy to play. Miss Dree, when the woman in the hat approached you, did she speak before you saw her or after? Before, Dree said, and didn't like remembering it. As if she'd been in the stall and I hadn't noticed her. That's the part that bothers me. I didn't miss a person. I missed a presence. Kell rubbed his thumb along the brim of his hat. He still didn't put it on a chair. He was too trained to apologize to furniture. Out of habit more than suspicion, I moved a quarter step and caught a glint between felt and floor. A sliver of something white tucked where the band meets the body. You get to a point with work like mine where your ribs keep breathing while your hands go to work. I crouched for a phantom shoelace, lifted the hat under cover of my own arm, palmed the slip, and set the hat down again where it had been. Kell didn't look. He was reading the steam off his bowl as if it had forecasts hidden in it. The slip was one of Lila and Dean's tiny envelopes, blank but for 2 words in a neat, taut hand. If you please. No names, no fingerprints unless God liked jokes. It hadn't been there when Kell came in. Hats don't sprout stationers' lies. Someone had slipped it without walking into the room or without registering as a person who did. Wolfe watched me put the envelope on the blotter next to the menu parade. He did not change expression. You see, he told the room, the composition continues. Rizzo breathed through his nose. She's outside, he said, and made it a statement because he can't bear an unknown he can't host. Someone should fetch her in. If she wants a room, let us make her a room. Mr. Ferretti, Wolfe said, almost bored. Your reflex to host is a defect here. Buxley tipped his glass to the envelope. Is this where we all admire the magic trick and pretend we don't care about the string? Archie, Wolfe said, the back bolt. I went because his mind was on the kitchen side of the house where Saul was a quiet shadow. The hall had the polite hush of a place people respect but don't understand. I stood at the pantry door and knew before I touched it that the dust mark had been disturbed. Not smudged this time, but lifted in a tiny, precise crescent that matched the one on the front latch. The bolt was seated. Between bolt and wood, a whisper of oil shimmered. I let it kiss my fingertip. Lemon, yes. And below it, that bitter middle of bergamot. Saul stepped from nowhere and everything. She tried again, he said. Or he, I said, because until you see both hands, you don't clap for certainty. She, Saul said, and not because he's careless with pronouns. Footfalls. Light but trained. The pause before the hinge tests. She pressed a thin blade under the bolt to learn the play and left a film the way a violinist leaves Rosine in air. You see her? I asked. He shook his head once. I heard her pass the window and looked at a shadow that wasn't there. She's made to be an outline. She maintains her negative space. Hats help. We went back in. Wolfe accepted the report with a fraction of a nod. He raised his left hand, and Fritz, who is as good at reading hands as any man I know, removed the consommé bowls that hadn't been cleared. Dree pushed hers away first. Appetite wasn't her game this minute. Now, Wolfe said, I will tell you what you already know and have been waiting to hear in my voice so you can decide whether to lie to me. A person has taken your habits and taught them to obey her uses. She delights in proximity. She corrupts small tools, cards, keys, cadences, because big ones offend her idea of elegance. She wants Mr. Kell discredited, not destroyed. She wants Mr. Ferretti unsettled, not broken. He is useful as a tuning fork. She wants Chef Bello angry, because anger is flame and she can cook over it. She wants Miss Dree to write that the circle is a hall of mirrors and then to discover she has been looking into glass held by someone else. And she wants Mr. Buxley to think he's immune so he will lend his immunity to her endeavors as men like him do without noticing. Dree tilted her head. "And you, Mr. Wolfe?" "She wanted to ring my bell exactly once," Wolfe said. "And then again. She wanted to touch my food. She wanted me to be told that I am not the only conductor of a room." Rizzo's hands came together, fingers steepled like a man in prayer for effect. "Then we should identify her." "That," Wolfe said, "requires that you stop performing for one another and answer, who invited a new system into your room in the last month?" Bello snorted. "I invite no systems. I have enough systems." Rizzo's smile took on pity. "I met with the consultancy. Brands, systems, the dreary sentences people recite when they've fallen. Out of love with craft, they wanted to observe. I did not permit it." "Name?" Wolfe asked. "I did not keep it," Rizzo said, affronted. "One does not collect lint." Kell's throat bobbed. Peter spoke to someone. He thought it might lead to a position." "And you didn't," Dree said. "It wasn't a question." "I told him to take care," Kell said, something fierce under the shame. "I told him we were not a buffet to be grazed." "Mr. Buxley," Wolfe said, turning his head. "You fund things. What did you fund?" Buxley spread his hands. "I donate to whatever makes me feel magnanimous on Thursdays. I underwrote a lecture series on hospitality as theatre. Everyone clapped. A woman afterward told me she could teach a room to breathe together. I told her to teach me to care." "Describe her," I said. "Everyone looks the same after a speech," he said. Hats helped. He thought that was funny. No one else did. Wolfe set his palms on the chair arms, a move that means a string on the web just plucked. "We will pursue the consultancy. We will ask Mr. Peter Kell for the name he deleted and obtain it from people who do not actually delete anything. We will watch the deli footage of a hat crossing Lexington with creamstock envelopes. We will also do something simpler." His eyes slid to Fritz, who stood with a plate that wasn't moving yet. "Dessert," Wolfe said, and Fritz did not advance. He waited for the second part. Wolfe lifted one finger. "We will not serve it," he said. "We will wait to be asked." Time is a material in that office. Wolfe pulled it out, laid it over their faces, and smoothed the edges. A minute passed, then two. Bodies realize they want sweet before minds do. Buxley's gaze went to the door and back. Dree looked like a woman who denies craving as policy. Bello's jaw tightened at being made to endure timing not his own. Rizzo's nostrils flared for the scent of lemon and sugar. Kell stared at his empty place like it might grow a tart as apology. Fritz, a genius at stillness when stillness is wanted, did nothing. The room breathed together. Buxley was not wrong about money. It trains lungs. Then, with the soft inevitability of a cue whispered by a prompter, a voice said, "A lemon tart, if you please." It wasn't loud. It was exactly pitched, exactly cadenced, exactly harmless. And it wasn't Fritz's. It came from the doorway to the hall where there was nobody, from the hinge of the kitchen which had not moved, from where echoes gather when they have been taught to climb walls. Except it didn't come from nowhere. It came from a mouth that had been trained to be a conduit. Rizzo's lips were parted a fraction. If he had made the sound, he had done it through someone else's will. An act like a finger twitch under a séance table. Bello half rose, then checked himself, because he doesn't take cues unless they're on a ticket. Buxley grinned, pleased. To be in a play. Dree's eyes narrowed to the length of a razor. Martin Kell flinched like a man struck by a remembered hand. Fritz didn't move. He looked at Wolfe, who gave him nothing. The room waited. Then the phone rang. Once, stopped, rang again, and stopped. I let it because lifting the receiver would have been stepping on a beat someone else had laid down, and we were finished dancing to their time. "Enough," Wolfe said, not loudly, and the sound wrapped the room in clean cloth. Mr. Ferretti Rizzo turned his head a degree. He's a man who hates to be named if he's not naming himself. "You will empty your pockets," Wolfe said. Rizzo smiled. Practiced. Hateful. Mr. Wolfe, this is unbearable. Wolfe finished for him. Yes, your theater is. Your pockets. It was a shot I hadn't expected him to take then. Neither had Rizzo. He stood because men like him prefer to be vertical when embarrassed. He produced a leather card case, a money clip, a handkerchief with a monogram so thin it apologized. He placed them on the edge of Wolfe's desk. His fingers were under control, but the tendons had opinions. The other pocket, Wolfe said. Rizzo reached and brought out a slender tube the size of a lipstick, nickel with a knurled rim. He set it down like it was nothing, and then remembered he hadn't planned that movement. Saul, who had flowed in from the pantry without breaking shadow, was already beside me. He didn't touch the tube. He looked at it the way a locksmith looks at a stranger's ring of keys. "Open?" I asked. "Not yet," Saul said. "Not with what's on our fingers." "Mr. Ferretti," Wolfe said. "What is that?" Rizzo found a shrug, found a laugh to pin it to. "A breath spray. Dining rooms require fresh air." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Perfume, citrus forward, bergamot beneath, and pressure-driven, which means it will lay a mist like a command." Rizzo's smile held, but the room slid half an inch under his feet. Our runners use such things. I confiscate them when they offend the room." "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said, "take the tube to the side table. We will open it later in front of men who bring warrants when the air is stale. Mr. Ferretti, sit down. You're not the woman with the hat, but you have been a flute she plays." That landed like a coin. Rizzo sat, not because Wolfe wanted him to, because he needed a chair. Dree's mouth did something that might have been the ghost of triumph, and then she killed it because she doesn't trust ghosts. Bellow's right hand flexed. Buxley finally stopped smiling. He had discovered the part of theater where money doesn't turn on the lights. Wolfe let them absorb it and then spoke so no one could say later he hadn't told them what game they were in. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "you will all return. Mr. Panzer will spend his night learning what he can about the woman you have met and pretended not to. Mr. Goodwin will find where the hat was bought. Mr. Kell will telephone his brother and say exactly this sentence: 'If you please, bring the metronome.' He will say it once. Then he will hang up." Kell swallowed. "The metronome?" "It is part of our visitor's catechism," Wolfe said. "It tells her when a room is ready to be taught." He looked at me and I knew the assignment that wasn't an assignment. "We have been played. Now we shall play." Fritz remained still, the tray balanced like a verdict. He did not serve the tart. No one asked again. The scent of lemon hung in the room, thin as a wire. Outside, somewhere on the street, a car door closed with the courtesy of a hand wearing a glove. The room held its silence like a sealed jar, and Wolfe let it sit. He knew silence makes men itch more than questions, and by the way Rizzo's fingers worked against his knee, the itch was spreading. Fritz removed the untouched tart shells from the sideboard with the solemnity of a priest hiding relics, and when the door shut behind him, Wolfe finally spoke. "You have all tasted the echo," he said. "You have all seen how repetition can be dressed as inevitability. Now we require less performance and more candor. Tonight is not conclusion. It is calibration." Buxley gave a soft laugh that no one shared. "If this is calibration, I'd hate to see what you call a storm." "You may," Wolfe said, "if you continue in levity." I saw Kell's shoulders draw in like a turtle. He was clutching the brim of his hat again, but I knew better than to think the paper slip was still there. I had it safe in my pocket. He probably felt the absence without knowing why, the way a man feels the shape of a missing tooth with his tongue. Wolfe gestured to me. "Archie." The telephone I went. He hadn't told me whom to call, but I knew. Peter Kell. When I got him on the line, his voice was quick, too quick. He'd been waiting for a shoe to drop. "Your brother's here," I said. "He's been listening to music he doesn't like." Wolfe has a message. I passed the receiver across the room. Wolfe didn't lift it. He inclined his head at Martin. Say it. Martin looked trapped. What? The sentence, Wolfe said. Exactly. Martin took the phone like it was hot metal. Peter, if you please, bring the metronome. He ended the call on Wolfe's nod, face tight as though he'd just confessed to a sin he hadn't committed. Wolfe folded his hands. Tomorrow we will see who arrives with it. The woman, or her proxy, cannot resist a summons phrased in her catechism. Dree tapped her spoon on the rim of her empty cup. And you expect us to come back for another round of theater? Yes, Wolfe said, because whether you admit it or not, you're already part of the play. If you leave, she will choose your lines for you. If you return, you may have the privilege of hearing me write them. Boxley leaned back, trying for the look of a man unconcerned, but I caught the twitch at his jaw. Bello muttered something in Italian that wasn't complimentary. Rizzo adjusted his cuff, but didn't touch the nickel tube lying on the side table, which Saul had left where everyone could see it glimmer. I escorted them out, one by one, watching the street beyond the stoop. A sedan idled across the way, same as before, windows politely tinted. A woman's silhouette could have been there, or it could have been smoke. The guests left with the uneven gait of people rehearsing nonchalance. Kell lingered, head bent, then followed them into the night like a man walking home from confession. When the door shut, Saul came in from the pantry, hair damp from the back door's mist. She was on the curb, he said. Hat, gloves, coat dark enough to drink the street. She watched them leave, then walked west. No cab, just walked. She wanted them to see her, I said. No, Saul said. She wanted me to. We gathered in the office. Wolfe hadn't moved. He looked at the envelope I'd pocketed earlier and said, "Show them." I laid it out. The neat words, if you please, sat there like a wound dressed clean. Wolfe's finger hovered above it. Mr. Panzer, the deli camera, extract stills for me. Hats, outlines, times. Archie, tomorrow you will go to the stationer and ask to see their book of handwriting samples from dictated cards. They sometimes keep them for record. If they demur, you will remind them of the fire code and the health department in the same sentence. Delicate, as always, I said. Bah. Delicacy is Fritz's domain. This requires bluntness. Fritz himself appeared then with a small covered plate. He set it down, lifted the dome, and revealed the sixth tart, the interlopers. He'd left it aside, untouched. Now he pushed it forward. For evidence, he said. Wolfe bent forward just enough to inhale. Crust too pale. Filling set but not smooth. And the bergamot. That is her signature. She wants us to taste her presence. I cut a sliver with my knife and held it under my nose. The lemon was there, bright and sharp, but the bergamot rode it like reins. It wasn't bad. It was too deliberate, too much like a message that could be swallowed. She's daring us, I said. She's teaching us, Wolfe corrected. Her error is presumption. She believes she alone can conduct. Tomorrow, when she hears the metronome, she will come expecting to lead. We will let her. Briefly. The evening ended in the only way our evenings ever do, with Wolfe sending everyone else out so he could sulk in silence and think. I left him to his chair and his orchids by proxy and walked Saul to the curb. The sedan had gone. The air smelled faintly of citrus, though there wasn't a tree for blocks. The next day carried itself like a man waiting for an appointment he doesn't want. At 10, Wolfe came down earlier than usual. He didn't say why, but I knew. Anticipation. He sat, eyes closed, while I checked the room again. Bolts, latches, drawers. Fritz baked fresh shells, this time only 5, counted twice. Saul brought stills from the deli camera, a hat tilted low, a gloved hand holding envelopes, no face clear enough to print. At noon the bell rang. Peter Kell stood there, metronome case in hand, eyes wary. He'd come fast, maybe too fast. "She hasn't called me," he said at once. "No messages, no notes, but after Martin's words, I knew I had to bring it." I led him in. Wolfe gestured. "On the desk." Peter set the case down. Wolfe flicked a glance at me. I opened it. The little wooden pyramid ticked steadily, same as in Peter's apartment. But the slip of paper tucked inside wasn't his. Neat hand, small letters, "If you please." Peter recoiled. "That wasn't there. I didn't put that there." "Of course not," Wolfe said. "She did. You have carried her message in willingly. She wanted this room to hear it the moment the lid opened, an echo inside a heartbeat." I felt the air shift before I heard it. The bell at the front rang once, stopped, then rang again. Same cadence as always. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Now," he said. I went to the door. A woman stood there, small brim hat shadowing her eyes, gloves neat, coat close. The citrus reached me before her words. "For Mr. Wolfe," she said, voice calm. "If you please." I let her in. She stepped onto the rug like she'd rehearsed it all her life, and for the first time we weren't chasing her echoes. She was here, live, and the brownstone bristled as though the walls themselves knew we'd been trespassed. When I brought her to the office, Wolfe didn't rise, didn't speak. He looked at her with the kind of stillness that makes a room forget how to breathe. She removed her gloves with precise fingers, sat in the red leather chair without invitation, and smiled. "Finally," she said, "an audience that listens." And I knew then that the composition had reached its crescendo. The only question left was who would conduct. She didn't so much sit as arrive at sitting, precise, practiced, a sequence of movements that had learned not to waste applause. Up close, the citrus had top billing, but something mean hummed underneath like a viola with a grudge. The hat's brim gave her eyes privacy without making secrets of them. She smiled at Wolfe the way a lecturer smiles at a particularly promising question. "You have been piping from the alley," Wolfe said, not moving. "Now you propose to conduct." "I propose to consult," she said, which is the civilized verb for the same impulse. "Mr. Kell's circle needs help with standards and service cadence. I have a method. You have an audience. At last we're aligned." "Name," I said. She took off the hat with a quick twist that showed the glove tips had been chosen for grip. "Marion Vale." I waited, on Wolfe. He doesn't care if a name is an alias, so long as it serves him. He can always replace it later with the true one and charge extra for the moral. He regarded the hat without looking at it. "Miss Vale, you entered my house yesterday and today without leave. You handled my cook's lemon oil, my back bolt, my drawer. You dispatched paper and pastry and boys with caps. You prefer gloves because you dislike the idea that skin leaves trails. You prefer scent because it travels where sound cannot. Why are you here now?" "To save time," she said. "I dislike waste. You have collected props, menus, florals, a tube Mr. Ferretti carries without entirely knowing why. You will reverse engineer a scheme. I can spare you the fumbling." "Pooh," Wolfe murmured. "Fumbling is the only honest part of invention. You, madam, rely on precision to bully truth." He angled a finger at the side table. "Mr. Goodwin, the tube I brought it, set it midway between Wolfe and Vale." Saul had perched by the bookcase where shadows do their best work. Vale's eyes touched the nickel and came back to Wolfe's face without confessing anything. That in itself is confession. "Your instrument," Wolfe said. "An atomizer," she corrected pleasantly. "A breath of cleanliness in crowded rooms. I recommend it to staff who wish to maintain standards." "You trained them to associate its vapor with obedience," Wolfe said. "Set phrasing, 'If you please' as a metronome. Repetition as reward. You laid a rail so polished they didn't notice when it ran in circles." "You make it sound sinister," she said. "It's simply conditioning. Dining is choreography. The circle forgot that." I reminded them. "You profit by the forgetting," Wolfe said. You approached Mr. Peter Kell after his dismissal, baited with employment, borrowed his access, printed his training cards at a shop on Lexington, returned with copies of copies to test whether men would accept the old as new. When that was too crude, you introduced scent as Q. Citrus, bright, plausible, bergamot, bitter enough to cling in memory. Then you inserted the Q when you wished the room to behave. And it did. That is a generous reading, she said. I prefer to say I rescued a brand from entropy. The circle had become a parish where no one understood the liturgy. I offered to restore it. Mr. Ferretti understood immediately. Rizzo's jaw made a small decision not to drop. Madam, whatever I understood, I was eager to keep the room in your pocket, she said, not looking at him. You've always been half right about cadence and completely wrong about consent. Wolfe's lids lowered till he could have been asleep if sleep ever looked that alert. And the duplications? He asked. A woman at the ladies' basin hearing her own intonation from behind her shoulder. A financier ordering a second squab with a vocabulary. His mouth. Borrows only for clerks. My cook receiving a request for a tart twice in 5 minutes in my kitchen. Explain the mechanism without insulting me. She weighed a choice. She picked admiration and wore it like a scarf. Mr. Wolfe, you could walk into any room in the city, say nothing, and change the air. You do that by control. I do it by prompting. You choose a word, plant it, pair it with scent, and you ensure it returns when called. I never needed anyone to be hypnotized. I needed them to be attentive. Rizzo's runners, they're desperate to please. The cue makes their feet move. Mr. Buxley, he loves the idea that the room conspires with him. The cue makes his mouth think it's clever. Miss Dree, she loathes being managed. The cue makes her feel the management and recoil. Chef Bellow, he hears the duplication and takes it as an affront. His anger is a bellows. Mr. Kell, he wants order so much he will mistake orchestration for it if it arrives in the correct envelope. People are easy. Not people, Wolfe said. Rooms. You trained rooms. People were raw material. She studied him a heartbeat longer than was prudent. Do you object to the method or to the hands that use it? To trespass, he said flat, and to presumption. You touched my food. I improved your evidence, she said. You're welcome. I kept my hands easy. If you think I wasn't itching to escort her to the curb and arrange for Kramer's men to critique her taste and fragrance, you don't know me. Wolfe had no interest in immediate arrests. He was building a shape only he could see, and he wasn't finished placing its corners. Your motive, he said. A contract, she said. A handsome one. The Circle needs a systems consultant, whether they admit it or not. They would never hire me if I simply told them, but if I demonstrate the fragility of their cadence and then fix it, they will pay very well. You create the disease and charge for the cure, Dree said dryly. She had stayed. Vale had drawn her like a story draws readers who claim they dislike plot. Doctors do it all the time, Vale said. They call it awareness. Why Mr. Kell? Wolfe asked. Why not simply break Mr. Ferretti and enter on a white horse? She let the smile acquire teeth. Because Mr. Kell is the conscience. You injure a conscience and an institution bleeds in exactly the right places. Mr. Ferretti thinks he's the face. He's the mirror. Mr. Bellow thinks he's the engine. He's the horn. Mr. Kell writes the rules. If he's compromised, the rules can be rewritten. By you, Wolfe said. By anyone who understands that rooms require authors, she said. Peter Kell had come as far into the room as the metronome case demanded, and no farther. He looked like a man who'd been told the ground under his feet was rented. You never wanted my resume, he said quietly. I wanted your files, she said, equally, quiet. You keep good notes. He looked as if he'd been thanked for his funeral. Buxley, who can't abide not being in the center of his own story, spread his hands. So this is capitalism, darling. She makes a need. She sells a salve. This is sabotage, Bello growled. This is theft, Rizzo said, and the way he said it told you he claimed theft as proprietary. It is demonstration, Vale corrected. The circle will not survive on snobbery and sentiment. It needs discipline. You had lost it. I returned it. You mistook control for virtue, Wolfe said. And then you mistook your appetite for a principle. Sloppy. Her eyes flared. The first misstep. She covered it with a breath. Spare me the sermon. You manipulate with words. I manipulate with tools. We're cousins, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe's mouth compressed. For him, that's the equivalent of hurling crockery. We are not acquainted, he said. Nor shall we be. He shifted his gaze a hair. Mr. Panzer. Saul stepped forward like an extra who had decided to take billing. He set a small craft envelope on the blotter, slid out a glossy still. Vale didn't turn, but I watched her shoulders not turn. The deli's camera had done what the copy shops had refused to. Record a hat crossing Lexington, gloved fingers cradling cream stock envelopes, the tilt of a chin that believed angles were an alibi. Your outline, Saul said. We'll get the rest. Evidence of shopping, she said. Not of crime. You also visited Lila and Dean, Saul said. Twice. You dictated inscriptions. Clerks remember you for your perfume and your patience. You like to correct people's grammar, mid-thought. Uncommon habit, also rude. Her smile returned, slim as a purse. I correct when correction is necessary. You correct, Wolfe said. To hear your voice, arrange other voices. He tapped the tube with a single finger. Atomizer, menus, cards, courier boys, envelope slips, and the trivial but telling effrontery in my kitchen, these are the tools. The structure is darker. You intend to make the circle dependent on your cadence so that when you tire of it or raise your rates, the room collapses. That is extortion, dressed for dinner. She lifted a shoulder. Call it leverage, if you please. Saul's head turned a degree. She heard herself saying it, too late. That phrase had stopped being an echo and become a fingerprint. You will not be hired, Wolfe said. You will be exposed. By whom? She asked. You? To whom? The police? What law have I broken? I've influenced taste. New York throws parades for that. Dries snorted. You broke trust, which isn't criminal until someone with money dislikes you. Mr. Buxley. Buxley spread his hands. I dislike boredom. She's many things, but not that. Rizzo's fingers twitched toward the tube and stopped. Bello glared at the hat like it was a souffle that had ruined his evening. Wolfe took a breath that filled his chest the way a gust fills sails. You have trespassed, he said. In this house, a fact the district attorney finds less trifling than you do, and in a private club in ways that can be framed as interference with commerce. You have stolen training materials. Your print shop receipt will say so loudly when a man with a subpoena asks for it. You have induced staff to act under chemical prompt, which a conservative judge will call adulteration if invited to. But I repeat myself, your real offense is ignorance. You mistook cadence for conscience. If you wanted me to blush, she said, you should have sent the atomizer earlier. He ignored it. Tomorrow, he said, you will return at 7:30. So will our friends from the circle. So will a representative from the district attorney's office and Inspector Kramer, if he decides to be amused. I will arrange a demonstration for them of what you call conditioning and what they will call fraud. If I am satisfied before then that the demonstration is unnecessary, I will cancel it and send a note. I am rarely satisfied. She considered the arithmetic. You could see decision pass across her face like a cloud. She stood, gloves in her hand, hat dangling from 2 fingers. If I don't come, she asked. You will be fetched, Wolfe said simply. She smiled for me then, because some people can't resist checking for the guard dog's leash. Mr. Goodwin? I don't spray perfume, I said. But I do like punctuality. To my left, the metronome ticked, unbothered. She heard it, and the smile gained a small private edge. She put on her hat. Tomorrow, then. She turned to go. I crossed to the door and did not open it. Your gloves, I said. She looked at her hands, then at me, then understood. I had not asked for the gloves. I had asked for the prints she had taken care not to leave. She slid the gloves on anyway. You'll be disappointed, she said, and I believed her. She left with the street's citrus coming in to meet hers as if the city had decided to be complicit. When the door shut and the notes of her walk faded, Saul exhaled through his nose. She'll come, he said. She must, Wolfe said. She has not yet finished hearing herself. He pointed at the atomizer. Do not open it. Kramer's men will take pleasure in contaminating it with their precautions. And if Kramer decides this is a boutique tantrum and tells us to stop wasting his cigars, I asked. Then, Wolfe said, we will give him a tart. Fritz, who had reappeared as silently as rain when you are reading, grimaced as if presented with a heresy. Not mine, he said. Not yours, Wolfe assured him. Hers. Peter Kell spoke from the chair where he had shrunk enough to look like a younger brother. Will she ruin us? He asked, not of anyone in particular. No, Wolfe said. You will do that if you continue to value cadence over character. She is an infection. Antibiotics are unpleasant. They are also illuminating. He closed his eyes and settled as if lowering a lid on a boiling pot. Miss Dree, write plainly for once. Mr. Ferretti, burn your cards and start over. Chef Bello, make food that survives being ordered once. Mr. Buxley, keep your money out of it until you learn what it buys. He opened his eyes, and they were as soft as basalt. Archie, telephone Kramer. Tell him to wear something he won't mind getting lemon on. The phone felt warm in my hand, which was imagination unless imagination had been standing too near an atomizer. I dialed. Kramer growled that he had 20 men watching 50 crooks and I'd be wasting the 31st. I told him Wolfe intended to stage a demonstration of fraud in a private club's dining rituals, and there would be evidence in nickel and paper and pastry. He swore, which in his grammar means yes. I hung up. The brownstone inhaled and remembered what it was when strangers weren't training it to be something else. The metronome ticked on, steady, unafraid. On the blotter, the little words, if you please, lay between the tube and the tart like a flag for a country no one had voted on. Tomorrow, Wolfe said, mostly to the room, partly to himself. We will stop echoing. By morning, the brownstone felt like its own witness, everything in place, everything watching. Wolfe cut the orchids short and came down early enough to make Fritz check the clock. I set the room for company and consequences, chairs as before, the blotter cleared except for the neat parade of our props. Menus, twin florist cards, the little nickel tube parked where an honest man couldn't miss it, the metronome at the edge of Wolfe's desk like a wooden heart that refused to be hurried. Kramer arrived first because he enjoys pretending he's late. He came in with his hat making weather and an assistant DA in tow. Weiss, narrow shoulders, wide eyes, the look of a man who's learned that law's sausage you shouldn't watch being made. Kramer shook the room's hand by existing in it and planted his cigar where it could argue with Fritz's lemon. Wolfe, he growled, if this is about tarts, I'm going home. It is about trespass, Wolfe said, and fraud and idiots. He let his eyes fall on me for that last one, which I let pass because he does what he does to stay limber. They weren't alone long. Our who's who of appetites filed in with the rain from their coats, still deciding whether to stay. Rizzo had learned nothing and wore it like cologne. Bello kept his hands in his pockets as if they might offend the upholstery. Dree carried a notebook she didn't open. Buxley beamed at Weiss like he was at a club meeting he could buy. Martin Kell had slept in a chair and brought the chair with him in spirit. Peter Kell hovered at the door until I waved him to a seat. Saul slid in last from nowhere with a brown envelope that had street on it. She came after them, right on the edge of punctual. Marion Vale, hat, gloves, citrus with grievance. She gave Kramer a glance that measured his cigar and found it déclassé. He returned the favor with a look that put her on a rack and cranked once. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. He let the room find its level and then added the weight. "You're here to watch a room misbehave," he said. "Then you will learn why." Weiss cleared his throat as if to say, "the people," without committing to which people. Kramer said nothing. He saves his words to use as cudgels. Vale folded her gloves into a hat brim and rested both on her lap like a lapdog that didn't shed. "Mr. Panzer," Wolfe said, and Saul set the brown envelope on the blotter, slid out a series of stills, grainy, rainy, but good enough to show a hat crossing Lexington with creamstock envelopes and purpose. Next came a clerk's signed statement from Lila and Dean noting 2 cash purchases dictated, "if you please." Then a print shop receipt for heavy creamstock and a change from Centaur to Garamond, time stamped 2:13 on the Tuesday Peter remembered. And finally a page from the deli across the way with a quick sketch by a counterman who turns out to be one of those fellows who can draw a face from a blur. The hat helps. The chin does the rest. Weiss bent, read, and blinked like the words had unexpected edges. "So," he said, "she bought paper." "She bought obedience," Wolfe corrected. Paper was the ribbon. He flicked a finger and I set the metronome ticking. Not loud, just steady. A little sound you can ignore until it becomes your spine. "Mr. Ferretti," Wolfe said, mild as a doctor with a needle he doesn't intend to dull you for. "Repeat for the room the phrasing you teach your staff." Rizzo smoothed his tie and performed for his favorite audience, himself. "A martini," he said, "if you please." Lift on the please, exact, neat as a line of soldiers. Wolfe's eyelids went south. "Now," he said to Fritz, who had appeared with a tray without making the air wrinkle, "serve the phrase." Fritz did it as he had the night before. To each guest, that quiet, identical sentence, "A martini, if you please." Dree's mouth tightened the same way. Buxley smiled like a conspirator with a secret he hadn't earned. Bello grunted. Because a grunt is a verb, Rizzo's lashes ticked on the cue like a man being tuned to A. Weiss watched their faces like a student who's just realized the class is about him. Kramer puffed once, 2 short blasts, which in his code means, "Go on and hang yourself further." "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said, "open the nickel tube 2 feet from the door." He glanced at Weiss. "You will smell citrus. You will not faint. If you do, I am not qualified to revive you." Weiss made a face that said he wasn't either. I took the tube, with a handkerchief. Saul's look reminded me not to gift-wrap the people's case in my prints, twisted the knurled rim a whisper, and sent a fine mist into the doorway air. Not much. Enough. It wasn't magic. No one turned into a duck, but something in the room drew breath together. Rizzo's fingers made that small adjustment on his knee. Buxley's tongue touched his lip in time with the metronome. Dree's eyes went narrower because she doesn't like not being the one noticing. Bello half rose out of habit to bark at a runner and sat because there weren't any. Martin Kell's shoulders came up a fraction, like a man about to apologize for existing. "Note," Wolfe said, not looking at anyone, "the readiness. The room is prepared to be played." "Prepared to be managed," Vale said evenly. A difference of emphasis. Wolfe ignored her. "Now we will change instruments." He raised a finger at Fritz. "Offer no dessert until you are asked. Then wait." Fritz withdrew with the tray like a poker dealer who knows which cards are warm. The metronome kept up its little tyranny. We watched a room of people who consider themselves different be the same. Breathe, expect, listen for sugar. We didn't make them wait long. Wolfe isn't cruel, he's exact. The cue arrived from the same nowhere as last night, except this time we were ready to watch mouths. "A lemon tart, if you please," said a voice that was not Fritz's. It didn't come from the hall. It came from 3 inches behind Rizzo's smile. His lips had parted by a sliver. The sentence had left on someone else's ticket. He blinked as if a radio he didn't remember turning on had piped an ad through his teeth. Buxley half laughed because he enjoys being in shows. The laugh died when Kramer's head turned like a tank turret. Weiss swallowed. "That," he said to the air, "is not normal." "It is not criminal," Vale said, polite, "until you decide to fear it." Wolfe lifted his gaze to her. "I don't fear it. I diagnose it." He nodded at Saul. Saul went to the door and a moment later returned with 2 men who could have been mistakes in a crowded room: copy shop clerk with a forked tattoo and a stationer's assistant with bergamot on his sleeve. Weiss took names, checked statements, asked the questions nervous men ask when they know they're being useful. When he'd finished, Wolfe didn't let the air refill. "Mr. Panzer," he said. Saul set another paper on the blotter, letterhead that had paid to be impressive. "H.B. Philanthropic," he read, neutral. "H. Buxley, chair." Buxley smiled as if that were news he'd always enjoyed. "My sins are on my stationery. What of it?" Saul's fingertip tapped a line. "Engagement outline, hospitality as theatre, cadence restoration program. Drafted 2 weeks before the duplications accelerated. Recipient, Vale Consulting. Draft marked circulate privately, pending crisis." The smile thinned. "Oh, come now," Buxley said lightly. "A board chair drafts 10 stupid ideas over lunch every day. Most die of boredom. If she got a draft, she got an error." Vale didn't look at him. She looked at Wolfe, which was smarter and worse. "He's a donor," she said. "He wanted to modernize a room that had grown smug and slow. He would have paid for success. He didn't ask for the demonstration method." "Lie better," Wolfe said. It didn't sound like advice. It sounded like weather. "Mr. Panzer, the doorman." Saul set down a slip in pencil, name at top, time in the middle, address at the bottom. Park Avenue, Buxley's building, Thursdays, 2:30. Ms. Vale to see Mr. Buxley. Listed as Arts Committee the first time, as Consultancy the second. After the second visit, Ms. Vale walked to the Lexington print shop. Camera says so. After the print shop, to Lila and Dean. Same hat. He didn't look at the hat. He didn't need to. Buxley's eyebrows asked for an ally and found none. "I meet dozens of—" "You remember Miss Vale," Dree said, dry as vermouth. "She was the only one who didn't flatter you." "Miss Vale," Wolfe said, "you told me yesterday you expect to be paid handsomely once the Circle recognizes its dependence on your method. Mr. Buxley drafted the instrument of that payment and cultivated a crisis to make it necessary. Whether he understood the means is immaterial to the effect. You're not cousins to me, but you are to each other." Vale held his look like a safe holds air. "If you intend to shame me, Mr. Wolfe, you'll require a longer rope." "I intend to expose you," Wolfe said. "Shame is a private hobby." He turned his head an inch. "Inspector Kramer." Kramer rolled the cigar to the other side of his mouth. "Trespass at this address is personal," he said, and the way he said "this address" could have meant a cathedral. "At the Circle, we can write it up as interference with business, conspiracy to defraud. Weiss can try it on in court and see if it fits. The tube, the paper trail, the kids with hats. Good beginning. I don't need you to like the charges. I need you to hold still for the cuffs if I bring them out." Weiss cleared his throat again. Braver this time. "Miss Vale, I'd suggest counsel." "Sweet boy," Vale said, which told you what she thought of the state. "I'd suggest vocabulary." "Enough," Wolfe said, and the room stopped moving because he had decided gravity was back, I'm not finished. He shifted his eyes to Rizzo. Mr. Ferretti, while you preen at the door and collect your little cadences, you are a liability when you become a channel. You carried the atomizer because it felt like authority. It was a leash. If you wish to survive this with employment, burn your cards and serve what is placed in front of you with the humility of a waiter who knows he is not God. Rizzo paled a polite shade. Bello looked like a man suddenly willing to share his kitchen if it meant watching that bonfire. Chef Bello, Wolfe went on, anger is heat, and heat can be used for soup or arson. Choose soup, Mr. Kell. Martin, you will stop mistaking ritual for order. Your brother, despite being foolish, is not your saboteur. You made him available to one. Ms. Dree, write this as plainly as you dare and as cleverly as you must. Mr. Buxley, send no more drafts at lunch. Buxley opened his mouth to deliver charm and found it had gone on vacation. You have an odd way of thanking donors, he said. You have an odd way of hiring arsonists to improve ventilation, I said, because sometimes I do earn my check. Wolfe flicked a glance. Permission to finish the course. I stepped to the metronome and palmed it silent. The room realized it had been listening to time and resented me for ending it, which is how you know a cue worked. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, and the way he said it told the room we were arriving. The tart. Fritz entered, civil as sunrise, carrying two, his and hers. He set them on the side table like a lesson. Even Kramer leaned. We will not eat, Wolfe said. We will smell. Mr. Weiss, note the bergamot that does not belong in a lemon tart. Note the waxed stopper. Note the tool marks on my latch. Note the duplicate paper in my drawer. Note the florist's duplicate card, and the boy who will point at the same hat 3 times if asked nicely. Note Mr. Buxley's letterhead. Note Miss Vale's patience. Note Mr. Ferretti's tube. When you are done noting, the district attorney will select a name for the charge, and Kramer will test bracelets. Weiss swallowed again and didn't nod, because nodding would have meant committing his head to something he'd have to sign later. Kramer took the cigar out of his mouth and studied the glowing end like it might pronounce sentence. Vale reached for her gloves. Mr. Wolfe, she said, and this time there was no smile. Cadence is not a crime. It is when you steal it, he said. And when you bring it into my house. She stood. She wasn't careless. She was calculating odds. I will return with counsel, she said. You will return, Wolfe agreed. Counsel is optional. He looked at Buxley and raised one eyebrow 0.5 millimeter. You may return with apologies. The room moved. Chairs, throats, small prideful things finding their places. I walked them to the door in 2s. Weiss with Kramer, Rizzo with his hands in sight, Bello radiating stove, Dree holding silence the way other women hold pearls, the Kells together like kin who've decided to try it for a day, Buxley trailing a grin that no longer convinced any face attached to it. Vale last, Citrus passing the threshold with one last attempt to own the air. It didn't. The brownstone took itself back. When the latch seated, I returned to the office. Wolfe had not shifted. He stared at the metronome as if it had volunteered to be human. Tomorrow, he said almost gently, to no one and to me. We play the coda. The room was taut as a violin string, all eyes pinned to Wolfe. He sat back in the big chair, lips compressed, fingertips meeting lightly under his chin. If the man had been any more immovable, you'd think he'd taken root, but those brown eyes of his were lit with that particular gleam which always meant one thing. The hunt was over, the quarry cornered, and the net ready to drop. You have all indulged yourselves in lies, evasions, and clumsy pretenses. Wolfe began, his voice as rich and slow as ever. Mr. Halberd? He aimed a heavy glance at the banker. You relied on secrecy to mask your reckless speculation. Miss Lowell? His gaze shifted to the assistant. You trusted your tears to disguise duplicity. Mr. Tynan, your bluster was meant to hide fear. Mrs. Carroway, your hauteur was a veil for desperation. And Mr. Vardis, he lingered a moment longer on the nervous man who had started this by ordering lemon tart twice. You thought to make your folly appear an accident of nerves. It was not. Vardis swallowed hard, hands clutching at his knees. The air in the office was dense with the anticipation of the kill. Even Fritz, hovering at the door, was holding his breath. The duplication of an order, Wolfe said, was not a lapse of memory. It was deliberate, a signal, a code, designed to convey that the surveillance upon you was tightening. You wished to alert someone in this household, not me, not Mr. Goodwin, not Mr. Panzer. You meant to reach the one person you knew had his eyes on every crumb and cup in my kitchen. Fritz. A neat conceit, but miscalculated. The man stammered. I don't... Pfui. Wolfe cut him off. You set this entire charade in motion to deflect attention from your own hand in the theft of those contracts. You feared that your role as intermediary would be uncovered once the falsified numbers emerged. You feigned being the victim in order to be seen as least likely the perpetrator. Yet every subsequent move betrayed you. The papers hidden not in some banker's vault, but in the lining of your own briefcase, the unconvincing protestations, the desperate attempt to stage a second trespass here in my brownstone to muddy the waters. All of it points directly, inexorably, to you. There was silence. Then Vardis sagged as though the strings holding him up had been cut. I never meant. It was supposed to be temporary. I was going to put them back before anyone noticed. His voice dwindled to a whisper. Archie here. I could have whistled. I've seen plenty of guilty mugs crack under Wolfe's pressure, but this one folded like damp laundry. The others in the room shifted, some indignant, some relieved, but all properly cowed. Wolfe gestured at me. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Spare me the vulgarities, but ensure he receives the man and the evidence. He will bellow, as is his habit, but his gratitude will equal his noise when he has cooled. Right, boss, I said, and reached for the phone. Wolfe closed his eyes, tilting his head back against the rest as if already dismissing the affair. When he spoke again, it was quieter, more contemplative. It is intolerable, he said, that men, grown and educated, persist in believing their petty deceits can withstand the scrutiny of logic. Appetite, Mr. Goodwin, is honest. Hunger is honest. But avarice is a masquerade that always stumbles. He waved a hand, and that was dismissal. Fritz took the cue and announced dinner. The suspects were herded out, the condemned man in Kramer's custody before the soup was ladled. As for me, I hung up the phone, jotting a final note in my book before Fritz laid a plate in front of me. I couldn't resist. You know, Wolfe, I said, maybe dessert isn't such a forgettable thing after all. He opened his eyes just enough to glare at me, then closed them again, which in our language meant, shut up and eat, 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 shut up and eat,